The virtual CISO moment is brought to you by vCISO Services, a leading provider of quality and experienced virtual chief information security officers for small and mid-sized businesses. Check them out at vcisoservices.com. Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. This is a very special episode as we are live. This is the first time I'm doing it live, and it's because this is the 1-year anniversary of having done the virtual CISO moment as a discussion with folks that are smarter than me. And I have done about 70 of these thus far, so I'm very excited about it. And hence the live episode and a very special guest. So Caroline McCaffery joins us. She is a lawyer who started a privacy and cybersecurity company called ClearOPS. She is also the host of the vCISO Chronicles. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg, and congratulations on the 1-year anniversary. That's a huge accomplishment, and I'm a little jealous.
I appreciate that. It went a lot faster than I thought it would, but I'm having so much fun. It's just a great way to help folks in cybersecurity and also the virtual CISO field. And I definitely want to talk a little bit later about the vCISO Chronicles as well. I want to dive into that. But before we get there, can you step through how did you become you have a more non-traditional path, if you will, as far as cybersecurity and building a cybersecurity company. You started out as a lawyer and still are a lawyer. How did
Yes.
you transition? What was your story? Why did you decide to start ClearOps, and what was the genesis of that?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. And I mean, I'll just to put it really plainly, it's the security questionnaire. So I started off as a startup attorney working for a law firm, did corporate securities work. So lots of finance M&A, went in-house, which was the dream at the time to become a general counsel. And the first company I joined was firmly in the big data era. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember the CEO turning his computer around and showing me all the data that he could collect on user behavior online. And that embarked on a mission of privacy. And once you get into data privacy, security is not very far behind.
Mm-hmm.
And as the general counsel, I felt very strongly that my effectiveness at the company would be improved if I really aligned myself with sales. And so they would send me everything. And along came the first security questionnaire. I mean, this is back in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, this is a new nightmare. And it's from a lawyer's perspective, the liability associated with those answers and how difficult those answers are to get within the organization. I thought that, there's got to be a better way. So I sat on that for many years, wondering if there was technology that would eventually come along. And even though I had absolutely no desire to start my own, or thought I had no desire to start my own company, when I met my co-founder and we started talking about this problem, ClearOps was sort of born. But yeah, started with a security questionnaire.
So, and it's funny, it's interesting that you mentioned that because that is I agree. First of all, there's a huge liability if you don't answer them correctly, and it's very difficult as a virtual CISO, particularly if you're just starting out working for a client. You can't just go and answer a questionnaire without having any sort of knowledge behind it. And back in the day, and I'm kind of dating myself a little bit, at least, and maybe this is just me, maybe I was doing it the wrong way, but when I would send out questionnaires, and when I was a full-time CISO, what I would do is I would first try to get the information from the group that I was sending the questionnaire to, and to try to fill in as many that I could on my questionnaire first. And then if there are things I had a question with, I'd send it on then those individual questions. Whereas sometime like in the past decade or longer, it's kind of flipped where now it's just become, well, as part of the due diligence, they're just going to blast you with a questionnaire that could have anything anywhere between 10 and 1500 or so if you're doing a full SIG questions on it. So it is pretty onerous. How does ClearOps help though in that sense?
Yeah, and just on the point about I just have to. This is kind of a joke that I have, which is that the security questionnaire came from a lawyer, and
They
The reason I
probably
say
did.
that is because lawyers, when we do transactions, we do a lot of due diligence, and the way that we do due diligence is through questionnaires. So, the way that I thought that ClearOPS could solve this problem, well, first of all, we embarked on public data. So we thought, okay, maybe we can turn questionnaires on their head and say, at this point of sale, do you really need to have 1,500 questions answered about the companies under the hood, cybersecurity practices and data privacy practices, or can you get a lot of this from public data? So we started on that mission, and that is part of ClearOps. But then we quickly realized, well, we still need some of that private data. So how can we help on that front? And we have we help virtual CISOs build a knowledge base through the gap analysis process and through all the other work that they're doing, so that that information is available for pre-populating questionnaires. With the advancements in AI technology, specifically NLP, a lot of people are now familiar with it from ChatGPT, although that's not what we're using, because that would not be
You
breaking
can't
the
send
liability.
your information out there because now you've just exposed it to a third party, basically. I think
Right.
some people are using ChatGPT to help in their job, and they don't realize that they're actually sending corporate information somewhere that they have no control over. So
I mean, it's you'll get, if you get me started on ChatGPT, we'll have the whole discussion on that. But from a liability perspective, they completely absolve themselves of all liability, which makes sense because the whole model is based off of public data from 2021 and before. So in order for them to have built that, there is a public data collection aspect to it, which means if you are adding data to it, you're adding to that bank of public data. So you should only be using public data or information, questions, whatever you're putting into it, that you're willing to have the whole world potentially see.
Yeah, and it's along the same lines for folks that are more on the cyber side and are familiar with a site like Virus Total, for example, where you can actually upload documents there and to clear it. It's like you should never ever upload documents for your organization there, because you've now sent it somewhere else. So it's the same concept in essence.
Mhm.
But now getting back to ClearOps, so you touched on something which is again one of those issues as a virtual CISO that I have problems with, where you get questionnaire from group A, questionnaire from group B, questionnaire from group C, and they're in essence asking the same questions but in different ways. And so for
Yeah.
each one, the answer is going to be we encrypt data at rest, for example. But
Right.
but they're asking them in a somewhat different way. So correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm hearing, your product, what it does is help to kind of match those together.
That's exactly right. So we look at a question to question sort of comparison, and we try to determine, the machine does, not us, but we built this model, to see if the questions are similar enough that this is the right answer that should go into that new question.
So your client base is mainly virtual CISOs or MSPs or individual organizations, or what?
Yeah, I mean, that is part of the startup, I guess, struggle and journey that I wasn't expecting to be so difficult, I will say. When I launched ClearOps, I did a lot of market research, and I went around to all my colleagues who are general counsels, and I said, "Hey, is this a problem for you? I'm just sort of curious if you're dealing with it too." And I got 100 responses from them that was like, "Yes, huge problem, don't know how to." So I thought, okay, that's my target market. I'll just go after my fellow GCs. Turns out I was actually the only GC that was getting my hands dirty and helping answer the questions. All the other GCs were actually fielding it, sending it off to the CISO or whoever was helping with security at their company, and then bringing it back and then sending it to the client. So, so as we started the sales process, I started to really listen. It's hard to do sometimes, and I realized every single company we were talking to was sending these questionnaires to a virtual CISO, and I thought, well, why am I, banging my head against a wall to sell directly into these companies if I should just go directly to the virtual CISO?
Hmm. Well, and thinking about not only a virtual CISO but also full-time CISO, I would imagine. I'm having images back at my day as a bank CISO, and which that was my last mm, corporate position before I went independent 6 years ago. But it was almost the same thing where legal would forward to me, hey, we got this. Would you take care of it? And usually it was a lot of times part of the as you said, due diligence, part of the
Mhm.
contracting and all that. So, well, I guess on that note, because I always ask this question, but it's a little bit different here. The question I ask, and you can either answer this or the other way that I'm going to ask it is, what would you think is a major threat, cybersecurity threat to small and mid-sized businesses today? I'm going to flip that. And you can answer it this way if you want. Do you think that the enormity of data and how we have to respond to these questionnaires and the liability involved is a significant threat to small and mid-sized businesses today? So you can answer either one.
Yeah, I mean, my answer would pretty much be the same for both of them, which I think the major threat to small businesses, small and medium businesses today in the cybersecurity is how it affects their sales. They're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to get more revenue. And we're talking about a year where everyone's still worried about a recession, inflation is still high. You can't get deals done if you don't have cybersecurity in place. And when the pandemic started and there was a ton of layoffs, which I think is sometimes people forget about what happened back then,
Mm-hmm.
security was part of the layoffs. It's one of those cost centers that tend to get trimmed. And we're seeing the same thing happen right now. And I think it's first of all, I think it's a boom for virtual CISOs. I hope it is. But I also think that means that sales are going to slow down because you just cannot sell anymore without having your cybersecurity, processes in place.
So
So it's a
there's
different argument.
right, and there's a temporal issue with that as well too, because from a virtual CISO standpoint, I know filling out the questionnaires, we typically will say, and this is probably normal for any virtual CISO, um, give us 10 business days, give us 2 weeks to fill it out. Now, the salespeople, they want it filled out in 10 minutes. The virtual CISO would rather have like 10 weeks. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, you're right, because you have to get eight, and you can't 2 out of 3. It has to be all of them. So,
hmm it's a broken process.
I I I choosing a little connectivity issues here. So if I'm fading in and out, I apologize. It's like it looks like it just came back. Um, you have you had any issues with regards to small businesses having liability problems because they have not filled these out correctly? Like, say, coming back, it's like, okay, you filled out a questionnaire and then something happened or the other group called you on it and you didn't actually have in place what you said you had in place. Have you seen that before? And if so, what was the outcome of it?
Yeah, I've seen deals lost for the answers that were returned. You don't have good enough security. I have seen companies go through their second, sort of annual audit of the security questionnaire where they promised a SOC 2 and they didn't follow through on that promise. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a breach of contract. People don't think of
So,
it that way.
and I guess if you answer something on a questionnaire that you answer it incorrectly or not completely, like again, let's just say that the question is, do you encrypt data at rest? And you say yes. Well, but in reality, you encrypted at rest in most of the locations, but not in this particular location. And this particular location happens to get dinged, and the data is exfiltrated, and now that's a breach of contract because you pretty much said that that was encrypted when it really wasn't, correct?
Yeah, it's breach of contract. It's fraud. So Delta actually sued a vendor for exactly this reason. There were a lot of claims.
So every virtual CISO out there, think about that. Okay. I mean, when you're filling out the questionnaires for your clients, it's a huge responsibility. Now, let me flip now into the virtual CISO world because
Mhm.
um, through ClearOPS is pretty much how you were introduced to the concept of virtual CISOs, right?
That's right. Yep.
And now you are the host of a new podcast called the vCISO Chronicles, which is actually, I had just heard about that through a colleague of ours that I think she was coming on or was on. Um, Well, what's your impetus for starting the podcast? What are you trying to get across with the podcast? What's your mission with the vCISO Chronicles?
Yeah. So when we pivoted the platform to focus on the virtual CISO work, sort of that database, the assessments, and all that kind of stuff, I started talking to a lot of virtual CISOs, and in hearing them, I was hearing the entrepreneurship journey that I've heard from other tech companies. Yes, it's the consulting, it's different type of entrepreneurship, but it is entrepreneurship. And I was hearing some of them talk about their struggles with marketing or sales and some of the things that we all go through as we're trying to start a business. And I love listening to podcasts. I go for walks with my dog, or I go for a run out on the Aqueduct Trail. Like or I'm in the car and I just don't want to listen to music. I want to actually be informed and educated. I love listening to podcasts that are about business, about entrepreneurship, and cybersecurity. I'm very interested in continuously learning in cybersecurity and data privacy. Anyway, so I thought to myself, there's a lot of these podcasts around like tech companies or startups and this kind of thing, but I have really rarely heard anyone talk about starting a cybersecurity firm. Sorry about my dogs in the background. And the entrepreneurship that goes along with that. And these are real struggles. And there's a lot of new entries into the virtual CISO community who are trying to start their own practices. And we all know there's a shortage in the cybersecurity community of experts. So why not have a kind of a pay it forward type of podcast where someone who's trying to get into it can listen, hear how other people handle these struggles of building a business. Maybe it'll help them also launch their own business, and we'll get some cybersecurity tips. Like it's to me, it's a blending of all these interests that I personally have, and I was hoping that other people had them too.
No, I think that's great. Actually, on that note, well, first of all, a couple of things that I've learned over the last few years is that, first of all, I like to joke that marketing is a four-letter word, and it's because marketing is just really, really difficult. I thought when I first started
Yeah.
as a virtual CISO, I hang out my shingle. It's like, ooh, Greg is doing this now. It's like, and he knows this stuff. Everybody's going to come flocking, and it just does not happen that way.
No.
Getting clients is, in fact, I'm also doing a series on YouTube separate from all of the virtual CISO moment and all that. But basically, as I have time, I think I've done about 7 shorts on this about cybersecurity consulting, from starting and thinking about things like LLCs and liability insurance. And the next one, I'm looking over my whiteboard over here because that's where I have the topics, is the next topic I'm going to talk about probably in the next couple of days is finding clients, because it is very hard. So I think that's a perfect niche. And the more on the virtual CISO moment, we kind of touch on a lot of different things, and sometimes we'll touch on that, but helping folks along the way, that is one of the most frequent questions that I get. Is like, well, how did you get to be successful as a virtual CISO?
Yeah. It's not easy. It's not like you said, marketing sales definitely 70, 80% of the time is the answer I get to that question.
Yeah, and it's so it takes a lot of learning and working and just grinding through it. I always like to tell folks too that, at least for me, from my perspective, um, when asked about the secret of success, for me, if you have a heart of a servant, you're always going to be successful because you're driven to serve, and as opposed to, that's how you measure your success. But I mean, I never myself planned to be an entrepreneur or to hire staff, whether it be 1099s or employees. But so very much looking forward to that. Where
Thank
can
you.
they find the podcast? Because you have it on a Substack, right?
I do. So I have part of the ClearOPS brand is a community for virtual CISOs called the Security Expert Marketplace. Because if we do have any what I call direct customers, so customers who use our platform without any cybersecurity expertise in-house or external, we will try to pair them with a virtual CISO. So that is where the Security Expert Marketplace kind of comes in. And so it's on our Substack through the Security Expert Marketplace. I haven't quite figured out yet how to get it onto Apple Podcasts, but I am working on that. So hopefully it's available in more than just the Substack location, but that's where it is.
I will put a plug out for Anchor.
Okay.
Anchor is what we use, and it'll automatically put it up on Spotify, iTunes. I mean, you got to configure it for each one, Google Podcasts and all that.
Okay.
It won't do YouTube. You would have to do that separate. But other than
Okay.
that, it's a good platform. So, well, that's a lot going on. So you're a lawyer, you're a cybersecurity company owner, you are solving a problem in cybersecurity, you're a small business owner as well. A lot of stress, I would imagine, with all of this. What is one thing that you do to help decompress from all the stress?
I really love cooking. It's for some reason it is just my happy place where I can get a new recipe and figure out how to make it and have a success where whoever's consuming it enjoys it. So that is definitely one place. I definitely will have. I have a few others, but cooking is my go-to.
Dennis, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name right now. D-Day is what I'm thinking about. He was the guest on yesterday. That was his go-to for
Oh, really?
relaxation. I don't think I've ever had two in a row that said the exact same thing. And I think those are the first two that I've heard was cooking. So that's great. I guess maybe I got to eat more in order to fulfill that demand that's out there. So, well, so what future plans do you have for both the company and the podcast? With the podcast, we already talked a little bit about getting it on some of the other platforms. What other
Yep.
plans do you have?
Yeah. So with the podcast, I'm certainly looking for more guests. Trying to be very mindful of diversity and inclusion. So trying to make sure I have cast a wide net in terms of looking for people to be on it. For ClearOPS, ClearOPS is a technology company for virtual CISOs who service the small and medium. So we really are trying to make sure we're building based off of what virtual CISOs want. And so I'm constantly looking for feedback and people interested in trying the platform so that we continue to build this product with features that virtual CISOs want and will use. My goal is to get it to a daily active usage on the platform for virtual CISOs. So that's really
Awesome.
the struggle. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I am looking forward to seeing that platform. We'll talk a little bit more about it offline. Well, this has been a great conversation, and pretty much everything seems to have worked right on the live stream. It looked like we had a little connectivity issue in the middle of it. I don't know if that actually came across, if it was just on my side, but I think that was okay. I appreciate you so much for coming on, Caroline. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to, well, I don't know if I look forward to listening to myself, but I look forward to more of your podcasts. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And everybody, stay secure.